Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. Today, we're taking a really deep dive into an incredibly fascinating and honestly pretty sobering book. It's called The Death of Utopia by Dr. Jose Joel Meguiza C. Edco. Specifically, we're going to laser focus on Chapter 11. Now, why this chapter? Well, because this is the exact point where grand, complex political theories stop being just abstract words on a page and actually get tested in real human lives. We're going to unpack the stark reality of what happens when closed utopian ideologies crash right into the very real human desire for freedom and conscience. So let's get right into it! Okay, setting the stage here, the source text draws pretty heavily on the philosophy of Karl Popper, but it completely grounds it in human experience. And it gives us this incredibly powerful quote: "The battle of ideas is finally tested in human lives." We aren't looking at dry, dusty manifestos today, and we aren't debating high-level political theories in some vacuum. Instead, we're looking at the raw, documented stories of people who genuinely believed in a cause, who literally bled for that cause, and then ultimately made the agonizing choice to walk away from it. So how do these movements draw young, idealistic people in? Well, they use this incredibly noble, high-minded rhetoric, right? There's this beautiful promise of liberation, of fighting social injustice, and building this unshakable sense of solidarity. But the reality they actually faced on the ground once they were inside, it was jarring. It meant total control over their bodies and minds. It meant institutionalized shame, designed to completely crush any doubt, intense fear, and, in some cases, even forced executions. The source paints a picture of a system that claims to liberate people, but practically demands absolute, unquestioning obedience. Part 1, 4 Stories of Escape. To really understand this crazy contrast between the promise and the reality, let's look at 4 real individuals who found themselves trapped and the exact breaking points that forced them out. First up, there's Daniel. He was a student activist who literally just wanted to fight injustice. His breaking point? He started questioning the movement's extortion of local farmers through what they called revolutionary taxes. And he had to watch a friend get branded a traitor just for asking questions. Then we have Maya, who joined up to fight for women's rights and end the patriarchy. Yet she found out the party was actually dictating her romantic relationships and completely controlling her bodily autonomy. Crazy, right? Then consider Ray, a farmer who just hoped to stop landlord abuse. He surrendered after being ordered to hang a friend over an unproven accusation in a people's court that lasted all of 5 minutes. And finally, there's Ella. She was recruited as a child soldier and promised a special destiny. Her illusions were completely shattered after she watched another minor, a kid just like her, die in combat. And you have to realize, these individuals didn't just casually change their minds one day. They made a monumental, life-altering choice to leave the weapons and the violence behind. As the text really highlights, they chose life over a lie. They walked back toward an open society, a society that, yeah, it's messy and imperfect, but it actually allows them to live, to breathe, to argue, and to just exist without the constant looming threat of death just for having an independent thought. The blueprint of control. Now, looking at those escape stories, it really begs a huge question. How do such intelligent, well-meaning, and deeply idealistic people get trapped in this kind of violent apparatus in the first place? Well, the source reveals it is absolutely not an accident. It's by design. It's this deliberate psychological machine called terror grooming. And the text defines this as identifying a person's specific vulnerabilities, creating deep dependence, systematically separating them from their families, and building absolute, unquestioning loyalty to the organization. Essentially, it's a very methodical way of taking a person's genuine empathy and turning it into a weapon. And this all builds into a highly specific operational blueprint. The source outlines this 3-step scheme utilized by these groomers. They call it the AOM scheme: arouse, organize, and mobilize. Step 1, arouse. This is where they deliberately induce emotional vulnerability by latching on to a recruit's anger or their sense of local injustice. Step 2, organize. Here, they actively replace the recruit's personal, individual identity with a really rigid group identity. And finally, Step 3, mobilize. This is where they fully weaponize the person for the cause. The author explains this is exactly how groomers systematically manufacture a recruit's pathway from a local grievance directly into armed violence. Which brings us to the ones left behind. So while Daniel, Maya, Ray, and Ella miraculously managed to escape this blueprint, the text presents a pretty stark and heartbreaking reality check for those who didn't. These are the youths who were completely consumed by the very movement that promised them a better world. The source systematically dismantles the revolution's promise of solidarity by detailing real accounts of leaders completely abandoning these youths during critical military encounters. For instance, there is Geraldine, who was killed in an encounter in Mindoro, leaving her mother absolutely devastated, not just by her death, but by the fact that she was abandoned by her own comrades. Or Chantal, a U.S. university graduate who was just left behind in an encounter. And March, a magna cum laude graduate, also abandoned near casualties during a firefight. The pattern, according to the author, is just undeniable. Recruit, immerse, expose, deploy, and then, when contact happens, scatter and leave whoever cannot keep up. This really grounds everything in the profound, ultimate betrayal experienced by these young people. The text emphasizes that in a closed ideology, individuals are ultimately just treated as resources, raw materials meant to be spent for a historical cause. When they are no longer useful, or when the survival of the leaders is suddenly on the line, the individual is simply discarded. Finally, life over ideology. So what's the overarching philosophical takeaway from all of this? Well, the author frames these human tragedies through the lens of philosopher Karl Popper, giving us an ultimate choice. On the one hand, you have the open society. Yes, it's messy, it's frustrating, but you can argue, you can reform the system, you can leave, and most importantly, your life is your own. On the other hand, there's the closed ideology. Here, the rule is absolute. You must obey. Doubt is punished as a crime, and your life is merely a resource for an inevitable history. The text powerfully argues that the messy freedom of an open society will always, always triumph over the deadly, uncorrectable certainty of a closed ideology. Which brings us to our conclusion for today. After examining the mechanics of terror grooming, the broken promises of solidarity, and the profound human cost of ideological certainty, the author leaves us with this lingering question drawn directly from the text. Do you want a world where your children can ask any question and live? It's a stark, unforgettable challenge that really forces us to consider the true value of freedom and the devastating price of utopia. Thank you so much for joining me as we unpacked this incredibly powerful source material today. Keep learning, and most importantly, keep asking questions.